Are we recording? Okay, that was no sort of thing. Okay, welcome everyone. Listen, this is a really important session. I think perhaps one of the most important things, because it is about the connection between partners generally, but specifically in this case, the connection between people doing evaluations and research and with the industry, the people who are sort of conducting processes, and making sure that looking at what makes that partnership valuable, impactful, and enjoyable, dare I say, and also looking at some of the challenges and the barriers of that. We've got a really great panel today. We've got Anna Brooks, who's the Chief Research Officer from Lifeline. She'll be followed by Niall, Mulligan, who is the General Manager of the University Crisis Line, and then Jaelea, Skehan, who is the Director of Everymind. And then I'm going to jump in for our academic, who's apologised, and talk a little bit about the industry perspective, but also about the researcher perspective as well. There will be opportunities in the Q&A, sort of in the meeting chat, if you want to put in a Q&A, any questions. And each of the speakers is going to take about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of a roundtable discussion, which I'll facilitate. Our first speaker this morning is, or this afternoon, or whenever you're watching it, is Anna Brooks, from the Chief Research Officer from Lifeline. So, Anna, over to you.
Thanks very much, Russell, and thanks for thanks for organising this event. It's wonderful to be here today. So just to a little bit of context before I sort of crack in properly, my role is Chief Research Officer at Lifeline Australia. So that's the national office for the Lifeline network across the nation. So we have 41 centres that are distributed across all of Australia. As I mentioned, I sit within that national office. Niall, who's going to speak in a minute, is actually from Lifeline Direct. So Lifeline Direct is a member of the Lifeline network. So Niall's actually engaged directly in service provision, whereas I'm part of the national office, which is why we're a bit of a double act today. So just in terms of the things that I would share about collaborating with a service provision organisation, the key word in that sentence is collaboration. So it doesn't work, in my view, unless you approach it as you would any good relationship building exercise, and that is, like, I guess, basing the relationship on the foundations of trust and reciprocity. They're key elements in any collaboration that's actually going to work, in my view. I am an or as I sometimes like to joke, recovering academic. So I now work within a service provision organisation. So I do have experience on both sides of the fence, and I'm going to sort of speak to that in engaging with you today. As a researcher, and I imagine some of you just want to really, the goal, the objective is to crack into the data and get the grant KPIs fulfilled. And there can be, as a result of that sort of, urge to get numbers and work on them in order to produce output, there can be a tendency to see the source of the data as a means to an end. And understand that, but again, like, if you think about reciprocity and trust and building relationships, there needs to be the foundations put in place before you're able to successfully get access to the data. So do bear that in mind. So that's the researcher side of things. As service providers, the thing I'd sort of draw to your attention is that we're laser focused on delivering important and, in terms of the work that we all do in this sector, often life-saving services to the community. And that's usually done, everyone, on the smell of an oily rag. I think it's very fair to say. We very occasionally need researchers to help us fulfill a specific output, something like an evaluation that's part of a grant. But most of the time, we're supporting a research project as a nice to have. So as a result, there can be a tendency to see research projects, and I'm really sorry to say it, but I think it's important to hear it, as a bit of a nuisance that distracts from core business. So look, I give you a little bit of context. And with all of that in mind, again, emphasising to you the importance of building a trusting, mutually beneficial relationship, I'd urge you to really, at the very start of any sort of exercise with a service provision organisation, think about your empathy and try and apply empathy skills. And I'd do that in 3 key areas right at the start. So if you're about to engage in a relationship to deliver a project, have a good think about, as I said, three key things. One being the main barriers that the service provision organisation faces in supporting research projects. Probably that's going to be time, the luxury of time to sort of support the activities that are involved in delivering the project with the researchers. The second one is the enablers for research within the organisation. So things like, do they have an existing research culture or not? Are there existing mechanisms for sharing data or not? Just the mechanics of being able to provide you with data as a researcher can sometimes be pretty tricky for a service provision organisation. And the other part of that, enablers for research, is think about who you're working with. So have a think about whether the champion for the project is the same as the point person. Often it won't be the same person. So the champion's really invested in the success of the project, but the point person, they've got they may have a bunch of KPIs that that they really have to put in front of the work that they're doing with you as a researcher. So do just think about those aspects, and the people that you're working with, what their roles are. Finally, the third sort of key point that I'd think about applying empathy to is, what are the motivators for the organisation that you're trying to work with? What is it that is actually driving them to undertake this project with you, and how can that inform your approach to the project with them? So that's sort of my overview. And what I'm going to do is hand over to my colleague Niall, who's going to sort of embed those thoughts in the day-to-day running of the business sort of context. So Niall, I'll zip it and hand over to you.
Thank you, Anna. I have to say, as usual, going second means the person who went before you took everything that you were going to cover. But that's fine. I do have some detail, I hope, to add to what Anna has said. Anna spoke about barriers. I guess the first thing to do is to look for the bit, the what's in it for me, for the service provider a little bit. We were discussing this last week, and I kind of went, we're having some research down the University Crisis Line at the moment, and I said there's nothing they can discover that wouldn't be of interest to me. So generally it can be quite easy to sell it, but you do need to kind of understand that and recognize that if you get that across the line, you're in a much better place. And then also understanding the activities, I guess I'm going to say business, because I am a business, but to a large degree of the organization that you're going into, because you may from the outside see them as behaving in certain ways, as working in certain ways, and you really need to understand how they work before you can properly, I guess, formulate questions and really figure out what knowledge they can provide to you and what you can reasonably expect to gain from interacting with them. Because if you steam right in without building a connection, you can waste a lot of your own time, really, which I suppose is kind of the self-interest part, which is always important. And I guess also I would say convince, and that might not be the right word, but ensure that the organization knows that you're respectful of their users, their end users, that you are not just kind of barreling in to kind of get it done and get the hell out of there, that you're going to spend the time that's needed to build a real relationship. And I know that's not easy, because time is always at a premium. Also, the organization, the people running the organization, are not necessarily going to understand research, understand the do's and don'ts, the pros and cons. I know I have been surprised when being involved in research projects about the kind of ethical framework. Well, of course, you need an ethical framework, but the rules of the ethical framework were not something I was massively familiar with. So, and it was great. The researchers who came in kind of got me across what I needed to know, explained to me what needed to be done, and that was great for me as well, because it convinced me that the people I was working with knew more than me, which is always great, and then and secondly that they were taking it seriously and respectfully. So it kind of gave me confidence to work closely with them. There's I guess that's the other fact. You may have to spend some time in educating the organization. Also, research does create a certain amount of extra work inevitably. If you've already done the what's in it for me, that can make it a lot easier to get people. Well, what's in it for me there means what's in it for the organization that you're researching with. If you've got them on board, then clearly if there is a little bit of extra work involved, they're going to be far more open to doing that, because it just makes sense. They trust you, they understand what you're doing, and they can see a benefit for the community. So if you've got those three things going, they're going to want to help you. There may come a point where they go, no, this is unsustainable and we just can't do it, but they're going to give you as much help as they possibly can. I guess you want to have a point person in the organization. It may not be the person. You may be dealing with a range of people across the organization, but you need to have somebody who owns it within that organization. Because if you do come across barriers, or if you come across somebody who's just plain uncooperative, which hopefully doesn't happen, but I'm sure it can happen, you kind of need to find a way to work around that. And I guess so you need a partner within the organization who may not always be the most senior person, somebody to explain the organization to you, because everybody knows that all organizations have their own little idiosyncrasies. So you need to have somebody who understands that and can share it with you. And maybe somebody you're getting resistance from somewhere and you're not really quite clear why there's resistance, maybe they can explain that to you. So I think finding your person as early as possible is a good idea on those terms. And I guess the idea of sharing knowledge and resources as you go along is a no-brainer. And I think, yes, if it works and if it's working well, it's going to feel like a partnership. So they're not going to be resistant to you, and you're going to feel that you can trust them. And I suppose in research projects, there's going to be times where you can feel a bit isolated and not supported. And if you've built a good relationship within the organization, you can share that. You can look for support from within the organization that you're working for. Because I'm guessing, and this is a guess because I've never been a researcher, but there must be times when researchers are kind of working on their own. They might have a supervisor within their organization, but they're spending a lot of time with people that they don't necessarily know that well. So it's a good idea to build human. I mean, I'm sure we do all the time, but there's a big plus in having good human relationships around you, I would have thought. And in terms of motivating the organization that you work with, I think once they're working with you and you're working with them, it's important that when you do come to your conclusions, that you bring the conclusions back to them, because as we all know, it's quite easy to misinterpret something due to lack of one crucial piece of information. So if you bring it back, and I guess you can bring it to them as you go along, but that all of your conclusions should at some place be tested against the real world experiences. Not to say that the real world experiences will always trump your research, and it may well be that sometimes people don't want to hear what your research has kind of uncovered. But once you're fair and open, I think that and you've and you haven't kind of suddenly produced that rabbit out of the hat, people are going to be far more accepting of any kind of conclusions that maybe don't chime with their preferred reality. And I guess at the once you have kind of come to the end of that research, be open to sharing it with groups within that industry, within that organization. I mean, you've done all that work. Well, look, this again might be something that is so obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway, that you've done all that work. You probably want to get some credit for it. So get out there and push it through as well as the academic end, look at pushing it out, and who knows what other opportunities might arise if you do that, if you do that well. I've kind of rambled a bit. That is my style, but I guess that's really what it comes down to. Build relationships for your own well-being and for the well-being of the research project.
Niall, I think you've given a great perspective from an industry partner, and some of those things about relationship, understanding the other person's perspective, and also about helping them understand the researcher's perspective, and then most importantly is about the impact of the getting value out of this. Everyone's invested a lot. So I think that's a really great summary in building on what Anna said. I might now come to Jaelea from Everymind. And Jaelea, from your experience of a long and distinguished career in terms of Everymind and in partnerships, tell us some of the lessons that you'd like to convey for researchers.
Yeah, look, and I'll join Niall in Ramblers Anonymous probably after the session today. Probably a little bit like Anna, I'm not a reformed academic, but I actually have academic qualifications, which I've actually done while working in what I call an industry partner organisation. So for those who don't know Everymind, we're one of the industry partners on the Manna Institute along with Lifeline. And we're a little bit interesting by nature in that we're a national institute dedicated to the prevention of mental ill health and the prevention of suicide. But our governance is actually nestled within the Hunter New England local health district. And so we're very embedded in a regional community in a health service framework. And so, in my whole kind of career of working at Everymind, which is over 20 years now, that's actually been within a health service delivery framework, which is obviously we don't deliver services, we design and implement and scale programs, prevention-focused programs, policy advice and other initiatives that kind of meet people where they live, work, learn and connect with each other and connect with services. But we've got a laser sharp, I guess, vision, which is on empowering people and organisations to implement change for themselves, for each other and for the future. And a purpose, which is actually around bridging the knowledge to practice gap in the prevention of mental ill health and the prevention of suicide. So research is fundamentally important to us. And so we both do research and we're also industry partners on research, and sometimes we're the funders of research. So I'm going to draw from, I guess, our diverse experience in that. So as I said before, we're industry partner on research grants. So people, I'm going to use a negative way of saying it, use our name to help get the research grant. And we might partner, bring the kind of knowledge and expertise and perhaps the other industry partners to the table that we work with. We're a funder of research grants. So sometimes Everymind partners with universities and we fund university researchers to work with us or deliver something for us or one of our programs, a bit separate to our internal researchers. Often we're contracted by industry to conduct research, so therefore we're working with industry, and most of the time that industry are people outside of health, mental health and suicide prevention. But I also sit on a number of research advisory groups and also make decisions about funding. So I sit on the Suicide Prevention Research Fund advisory group since it's been established. So I'll try and kind of bring a few reflections there. But one thing for people to remember as researchers, and both Anna and Niall have touched on this, is that most of the mental health and suicide prevention sector and services get funding for programs. And within that, you're lucky if you can siphon off a small amount of funding, which is for evaluation. And then you've got to be really thoughtful about the type of evaluation you can do with the kind of resourcing that they give you. So we give out even large and small grants to deliver services, deliver programs. But often what we don't do, we, the general Australian us, don't do is fund the research to sit alongside of that. The other thing that happens is we fund research that doesn't necessarily have to connect to mental health and suicide prevention reform, current service delivery priorities, or what communities have set of priorities. And so we can get this real disconnect between research and practice. And that's got a range of downfalls. But one of the ones that I'm seeing increasingly is people start to not value research, because what they say is research is slow, research is done by people who don't understand what practice is like or what communities are like, research doesn't have value in the here and now. But we all know that research is critically important to ensure that what we do, A, doesn't do further harm, actually leads to the kind of outcomes and impacts that we're all looking for when we're working in a real individual and community focus. But also, we just need to know that we're investing our precious resources, our people resources, and our money resources in exactly the right way. And so, unless we do research and good quality research, we're not going to know the answers to those things. And so I think the way of the future is much more lined up research, practice, community, and lived experience working together to do research and translate research much more quickly than we have in the past. So I kind of feel like researchers not partnering well with industry and community is going to be a thing of the past, that these are skills for the future and the skills for right now. So a couple of things, I think, a couple of key reflections on when we've been involved as an industry partner. And I was a little bit negative up front and said, you put our name on it to get you across the line, right? So organisations like Lifeline and like Everymind are great industry partners to put on research grants, right? We've got access to knowledge sets. We're known for delivering programs. Lifeline in particular has like reach across the whole country to individuals and communities. But often what I find is sometimes the researchers want to put you on in name, but don't want to involve you in practice. And I'm going to say, stop doing that. So, and noting for what Niall said about, you know, the time we might have available, every organisation is different in terms of the amount of time and resources they can put into being an active industry partner. But don't add people as a partner if you're not going to, A, involve them in the planning and the thinking about the research. If you're not going to involve them in thinking early at the start about how the research is going to be translated into practice and meaningful outcomes to people in quick time, like in as close to real time as possible, and how you're going to negotiate what you can share along the way, because people don't want to wait till you finish publishing your paper in a peer-reviewed journal that takes 2 years to publish for you. They actually want to be able to do practice improvements immediately based on what the research might mean for what they need to do differently. So negotiate those things up front about what data or what outcomes can be shared when, with whom, so that we can translate things into practice immediately while you're then translating the outcomes into research impact, if that makes sense. Industry partners have real connection with other industry partners. So in some respects, you know, we're Everymind and Lifeline are interesting industry partners because we're not just a partner in and of ourselves, but Everymind, for example, has partnerships with workplaces and industry, certain kind of sectors and industries that we work with the media, with a range of other kind of community organisations that we work with all the time. And so thinking about how your industry partners help connect you with other industry partners that might not be formally on a grant, but are really important to the delivery and the translation of that research. And also, can you ask people about how you're going to involve them and reimburse them at the point of the research grant? So there are many research grants that go in that have no FTE allocation for our research staff here at Everymind, who are actually going to help them with the doing of the research as well as the advising on research. So make sure your industry partners, you ask them about whether they need FTE that's built into the research grant for the start. But also, if you're going to draw on the industry partners, other advisory groups or their lived experience advisory groups or their internal providers, what resources are you adding into the grant to make sure that you can do that, so that not everything is added in kind? Because time out of the office, time away from work, every time you involve a lived experience advisor, when you're an organisation with a paid participation policy, which most of us have and should have, then that all comes at a cost to your industry partner. So make sure you've negotiated that before you put the grant in, which also means please don't come to us 2 days before the grant needs to go in for a letter of support and our names to kind of put on your grant. So kind of think about building those relationships over time, because there's actually more work and more research work than any of us could ever do on our own there's plenty to go around. We're probably more than happy to work with you and partner with you, but kind of don't take the relationship for granted. Build it and nurture it. As a funder of research, so when we've worked with other researchers, so when we've funded researchers, some of which are researchers in the Manna Institute, I think one of the things we like to do up front and people need to work on is, you know, what's the timeframes we're working to and what are reasonable timeframes that work for the person doing the service delivery or kind of answering to their communities, and ones that work for the researchers. So negotiating those up front. I've heard that a lot about communication and empathy, but I think it's also good negotiation skills around, you know, what actually are the timeframes, and also what's the usability of the research that you're providing. And so often when we fund research that's external to our own team, we want to tap into specific either data sets or research expertise that those researchers have that we don't have, but in a time frame that we need, because what we're doing is we're developing a new resource, right? So we can't wait 2 years for a piece of research to be finished when the deadline to our major funder is 6 months. And so often it's about what's feasible within timeframes, what's kind of available, what's realistic, and how can we kind of work together to get it done. And I thought I'd just finish by, I guess, a couple of reflections about when we've been funded by industry partners to do the research. And noting that sometimes industry partners that fund Everymind for research are other collaborators in the mental health and suicide prevention sector. So some of our, you know, large NGOs that want research done may come to Everymind because of our particular expertise, particularly in program design or in resource development, and doing that in a research framework along the way. But some of the things I've learned from error as much as trial, and wouldn't do it again, are some of the, I guess, the following. One, who gets to make the decisions. So sometimes the industry funder actually wants to make the decisions at certain decision points along the way. And sometimes as researchers, particularly if you've set up advisory groups or particularly lived experience advisory groups with decision-making ability, if the funder says, no, actually, we're making the decision, then you fundamentally have to know that as delivering research, because others that you're working with need to know that. So we have had an example before where we set up a lived experience advisory group as part of the governance structure for a project, thinking it was good quality research design. They had decision-making input and were equal partners in decision-making according to our framework at particular points along the design journey for this particular resource as it was. But actually when the rubber hit the road, the funder, who was another partner we work with, actually they were making the decision. And so actually negotiating and understanding those things up front is really important so that you don't ruin your own reputation with the others that you're working with. So, you know, under the Manna Institute, if you're collaborating across a number of universities and actually you're collaborating with your lived experience advisors under the Manna Institute or with community partners, and you set up certain structures, if the industry partner or the funder then says, no, we're still going to kind of inform or make the decisions about that, you need to know that up front to manage your own relationships and your own reputation. You need to know up front how independent the research can be from the industry partner, that they might not be as amenable to the kinds of independence of research that we would hold dear as researchers. And again, you need to know that up front, because again, you might make the decision not to do the research, or you might make the decision to manage it in a particular way. And you will often need to negotiate with an industry partner about the value of research ethics, because research ethics is sometimes one of the things that slows down a process. But trying to then talk about the benefits of getting that research ethics is a skill in terms of how you manage an industry partner, because I just can't fathom the amount of research that we have conducted in the last 2 decades in mental health and suicide prevention that can't be shared more widely because we just didn't get the research ethics. And if we just slowed down by 6 weeks or 2 months, one, we could have built the research plus also built the kind of program outcomes. And so that's where kind of partnerships with researchers and industry partners and communities and others can really kind of have benefit when people are bringing those different kind of skill sets together. I think that's kind of most of it. I guess the only kind of last couple of reflections I'd make is maybe think about partnering with industry, and I would also add partner with community, to define what the research question is in the first place, not just the response to the research question. I think we spend a lot of time thinking about partnering on how we do the research, but maybe not partnering on how we define what the actual question of the research is and what is the gap we're really trying to fill. And I particularly heard this from people with lived experience at a recent national summit, which was, you involve us at the point of which the question's already been determined and we don't think the question's right. So I think maybe just rethinking about the point at which you might bring on a whole range of partners. And finally, I'm going to say there is great opportunity. So I've talked about some of the kind of learnings and the bugbears, and I think across Anna and Niall and I, we've probably talked about the kind of pitfalls or the things to think about. But there are massive opportunities for us to do so much better work together by connecting up as well as we can our people with a whole range of different knowledge sets and expertise to work together. And so think about your partners as being partners for the long term, because your first example of working together might not be brilliant. It might have a whole range of bumps along the way, but don't let that put you off coming back again and doing again, because actually when we all learn about how to work better together, the communities that we serve are going to be much better served by those partnerships than us doing the work in isolation. So feel empowered and emboldened to do this work. Over to you, Russell.
Yeah, thanks, Jaelea. There's so many rich veins that we could mine in that. We're not going to have time, but I'm going to build on some of that because it's just resonating with a few of the points that I had. So my experience is I was an academic, and then I became a recovered academic. I was an executive director for a local health district for 12 years. So I was actually the funder of research, etc. But now I'm a lapsed academic, and I've come back into academia again. So I have looked at that view a bit both ways. But building on what you were saying, I think really, Niall, Anna, and Jaelea, often I say, the best marriages are marriages in which each partner thinks they've got the best deal. And, Niall was saying, what's in it for me? Well, a long-lasting relationships and marriages is go, I've got the best deal here, and they both partners think they've got an awesome deal, and that means thinking about what's in it for me. It means about building trust and reciprocity, all these things in relationships as well, and that's such an important thing to sort of take the other person's perspective and see what's the value that you're offering, because as Jaelea said, the opportunities for researchers who often, when I've come back to the uni sector, are quite insular and don't see the value that they can offer. And so connecting these people, the researchers can be incredible, valuable, free resource for a lot of organisations. So that's a really important thing. The other thing I'm going to say is a lot of the difficulties in marriages and relationships are through to misaligned expectations. And I think all the previous speakers spoke so much about that. Spending up time, and I quote Ken Henry, the Secretary for Finance, and my advice here is, go hard, go early, go often. And maybe that's a bit harsh, but be very clear up front about what the expectations are, about what your expectations are and what your partner's expectations are, and have those conversations early. And so, and Niall and Jaelea picked up on some of these things too. The timelines. What's a realistic timeline to do it properly and respectfully, to get ethics and build relationship with people with lived experience and the place-based expertise? What's going to happen with the results? Is it truly independent arm's length evaluation, warts and all, or is it going to be moderated, or are there going to be a few forms? Is there going to be like an internal report which you can give to the partner straight away, And the deal is that, yes, and then another 2 years down the track, we'll have a research publication. So be very clear about, those sorts of things, the ethics and also the outputs. What does that look like? And that's not a once-off conversation. That's the go often. So just because you say something once doesn't mean that the person's listening, and it doesn't mean that you've communicated it clearly. So, going back again, and I know as a funder, I was managed brilliantly when I was an exec director by someone who was doing an eval for us, because they kept shaping my expectations. Like, we can't do this. This is what we're going to do. This is what it's going to look like. How does that sound to you? And it was a conversation. And so at the end, you go, perfect. That's exactly what I was expecting. But that lack of communication and lack of investment relationship, and you go off and say, oh, this is what's going to happen. Here's the contract. And the researcher disappears for 6 or 12 months and then comes back with something. And the interested partner goes, well, that's not what I was asking for. Have I paid all this money for this piece of rubbish? And I've got to tell you, that's happened. I have other connections in New South Wales Health, and it's happened where they've invested over 500,000 in a report that was useless, and they actually had to contract another person to make it meaningful, another company. Interestingly, that company, and this is the other thing about relationship, the importance of long-term relationship and respectful and trust building. Interestingly, that company that rescued that big New South Wales government agency in terms of getting a useful report, they're going back to them again as a preferred provider to do the next big eval because they were so good. So this is a really important thing in terms of, I think Anna was talking about trust and reciprocity and trust building relationships. And trust is delivering what you promised you deliver as well. And it's being honest. So my second point around that is communication as well. I think that's where a lot of researchers fail. We're looking in our ivory towers and we don't talk and say, okay, this is what I heard you saying. And we had our first meeting. This is what I reckon how the project's going to shape up. What do you think? Let's talk about this, etc. But then if there's any hiccups, communicate. In relationships, silence is not golden. And I know through COVID, we had some decent sized contracts with industry partners, and we just kept them up to date with what's happening. And, we were quite disturbed, and I thought they'll be unhappy with us. Like, sorry, it's going to be about a 6-month delay because of COVID. And the partner said, that's great. A lot of these other projects completely folded. That's great news. But just if there's a problem, don't hide it. Just go early. So as soon as there's a bit of a hold up, communicate, good and bad and challenges as well. And so they're my main things I'm going to look at. And the other aspect, which I think is a great point, which all comes together, like what's in it for me and Anna reciprocity and Jaelea, I reckon a terrible past history of some researchers are being exploitative. They come in, they ask for the name, or they come in and they work with a community. They get a publication, they get a nice conference trip, etc. What's left in the community? Nothing, because the publications come out 2 years later, and you really exploited a local community. So you've got to think about what value you add. And Jaelea's point, I can't emphasize it enough. Make sure there's recognition and tangible recognition, if possible, for the people who participated in the research. We've stuffed up some, but a couple we've done really well. And we put money aside for 3 consumers to present at a conference. So their travel, accommodation, and registration fees. So that instead of the academic sort of going, yeah, look at me, it's like, no, you were the sort of the champions in this. You go to the conference, you present, and because that's where the value is. But you need to do that ahead of time, and you need to budget for it. And once again, it's valuing the relationship. And that you're leaving something. And if possible, I think some of the other things which Jaelea talked about, it is acknowledging lived experience and place-based experience in all its forms. And that may well be having money to do some training in terms of research, or someone to support someone to do their PhD. The other really important lesson, and this is Niall's point of what's in it for me, what's in it for you as an academic ivory tower researcher, I can say that because I'm a lapsed academic, is if you do this well, we've got countless examples, not countless, but a handful of examples where we've had a small evaluation project, which has now turned into a very, like over 6 or 12 months, which has now turned into very large, multi-year, big dollars projects, because we did the first one well. and they go, we're going to go back to those people. This is a good relationship, and it builds that relationship. And the other thing, building on what Jaelea was saying, it's just not the mental health sector that can be an industry partner. It can be the human services sector, because mental health is an issue for them. And can I just tell you, sometimes they have money. They have serious money. So we think about the major services: police, ambulance, social welfare, health, other areas, and other industries who have a concern for the mental health and well-being of their employees. And they don't have much contact with mental health researchers, so there's a great opportunity to work in that area. I'm going to pause now because that was my 10 minutes, and we've got about 10 minutes now. From my experience of being a research funder, I've got to say also one other thing. As a research funder, I've stopped contracts because this is the other thing. This is public, usually public money, and most directors and funders are public servants who are very aware of public value. If not getting public value, they won't do it again, and they may, and as I did, and that was my exact words, this is not public value. I can no longer, and this is a small contract of about 120,000, 40K, and I said, I can't fund this anymore. You're not delivering, and there's no evidence that you're capable of delivering. I can't, in good faith as a public servant, so we terminated that contract. And this is what people are thinking about. Where is the public value of this public dollar? Everything you do is using up time and money, and it's our ethical responsibility to do that as effectively and efficiently as possible. I'll get off my little soapbox here and just throw to if there's any questions or any reflections around the panel first, in terms of particularly Anna and Niall, chance to reflect on some of Jaelea's observations. And then, then I'll throw to Belinda and Marg as well, to see if there's any other comments or questions you want to raise. But I'll throw back to Anna and Niall. This sparked anything for you?
Thanks, Russell. Niall, you're right if I jump in? All right.
No, I'm good. I thought we'd jump with Jaelea. I thought wrapped it up really very well. Lived experience, I think, is a key which we probably hadn't touched on, and I think treating, it's about treating, I guess, the subjects might not be the right word, but the people that you're dealing with the ultimate respect, and I think not expecting them to do the work for you is really important.
Yep. Yes, I agree, Niall. And I do, Russell, I'll say of Jaelea's presentation that I've got key point envy. Jaelea, that was amazing. Very, very deep and broad. I think that one of the things that I sort of, as you've all been sort of speaking, I've been reflecting on too. And I agree with you, Jaelea. There's great cause for optimism. I think there's so much that can be done when partnerships work well. It's the dream scenario. It's what you were talking about, Russell. Everyone wins. Everyone feels like they've got the best end of the deal. The industry partner feels like they're getting sort of free research capability, and the researchers hopefully feel like they're getting access to incredible data and having the ability to have that data and the way they treat it have impact in the real world. So that's gold for everyone. One of the things I think just sort of focusing on a specific area that I didn't sort of mention and that I think is worth mentioning is that part of the whole good relationship building is also being able to solve problems together. So when things do, and this is inevitably the case, when things go wrong, super important that everyone's able to be frank about it and to be able to adjust, pivot, whatever's required to keep things moving. So it may be, say it's an NH and MRC grant, you've got a particular plan for how the research is going to unfold, and for whatever reason that plan it isn't able to be implemented. Being able to sort of to grasp the nettle together and say, okay, that didn't work, so how are we going to now sort this out, and to do it in a way that everyone feels like they're being supported and it's constructive, and you're able to deliver something even though it wasn't what was originally intended. That's really important to delivering successful projects as well. So I think that, yeah, and all of this, it's all about the foundations as far as I'm concerned. If you build it so that you take, and I think even staged approaches can work really well. So you build the relationship in the initial stage, then you build out how are we actually going to define the question. Per your point, Jaelea, sometimes we're not even asking the right question when we don't actually engage all the key people at the start, key groups. So next stage, how are we going to define the question? What does it look like? And then how do we start addressing this question? So I think stepping it out in that way, whilst you're building the relationship, can be a really effective way to do it. I know that impacts upon timelines, but I think a well-planned approach to a project, including the relationship building phase, is worth a very great deal, and the potential for it to go wrong when you don't take the time to do those steps is significant in my view. So yes, I'm excited too, Jaelea, but and I think that there are ways to make it work well, but they do require that forethought and the allowance of more time for for the development of all the the relationship, as well as the approach to actually tackling what the project's going to look like.
No, thanks, Anna. I'm just wondering if there's any other questions or.
I don't have any questions per se, but I just wanted to say thank you, because I think what this conversation has made me realise, firstly, I'm feeling a little bit relieved that the points that are raised are mostly things I feel like I'm doing okay and doing quite well in my partnerships. But I guess the reason that that kind of made me really reflect on that is that I don't think I've ever actually had that overt discussion with any of the industry partners. I think I'm doing what I think is right and what I think is good. But what this has really highlighted for me is how important it is not to assume that what I'm doing is working, and really to be able to take that conversation in a bit more of a transparent way to say, how is that working for you, rather than me just busily doing all the relationship-y kind of stuff that I like to do anyway, versus what's actually happening on the ground. So thank you. It was really valuable, I think, just to kind of open my eyes as to the importance of that conversation from both sides very early on.
And Belinda, just reflecting on that, one of the things I used to do when old day, long time ago, when I was a clinical child psychologist, so I talked when you're with adolescents, every now and then you go, "How am I going so far?" And it's a great question to ask for your industry partners too. Just say, "How am I going? What am I doing well? Where am I stuffing up?" And to being open to that conversation is just really, you get gold from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So much value to it.
Jaelea, any
Russell,
other
I had a couple of.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. I've learned a lot. So all of you came from different angles, which was really good. Couple of things. I've found in projects I've led that having a steering committee with lots of different industry partners that may not necessarily be actively involved but could be, and also including lived experience, was gold for us. And we would just meet for an hour every 6 months, and it was like for the research team, it was like a sugar hit, because they would steer us in the right way. They would encourage us. We were doing this through the pandemic, and a lot of it seemed like hard slog. And they would then say, "Oh, you know who you should link up with for this module that you're writing together? That person there, and this person here, and you should talk to that." And it just sort of helped us all the time. The other thing is that we found that they would help us with, getting that research question right. We would acknowledge them on our website, which we always do. And if any of them helped write some of the resources or edit some of the resources, we made sure that that was acknowledged, so that then personally and as an organisation they could go on and use that. We got so excited about stakeholder engagement that we and funding body engagement and all that sort of thing, we wrote papers about it because we're very boring. But we just found it added so much, and ongoing from that project, it's built other opportunities where they're coming to us and saying, "Hey, let's do this together," and it's been really exciting. I will say it's very time consuming, but it's so worth it. So I'll put in the chat our papers if anyone's boring enough to want to read them. But yeah.
And Mark, that's a great point. Yeah.
What
Relationship takes time.
not.
No, not at all. And relationship takes time. you've got to invest time in relationships. So I think that's a great point. Jaelea, did you have any further reflections?
Rather than a reflection, I'm going to make a plug, particularly to the postdoctoral researchers on the Manna Institute, or people that know others that don't currently have a fellowship under the Manna Institute that would be great, I guess, to be brought in. So the Suicide Prevention Research Fund will have another round of postdoctoral fellowships coming out in the second half of this year. I don't think the dates are released yet, but the intention to bring them out. The really important thing about those postdoctoral fellowships, because I'm one of the people helping to steer it, is that it will be looked on favourably if the postdoctoral fellows have industry partnerships or service or program partnerships. So if you don't know who might be a good person, or like I'm thinking organisations to partner with on suicide prevention research specifically that is relevant and meaningful to regional, rural and remote communities in Australia, then please feel free to come and reach out to me, or reach out to me through, you know, the Manna Institute, because there are so many organisations that are looking to partner with researchers who have great opportunities for research but aren't being done. But so far, all of those postdoctoral research partnerships have got more of the, I would say, the surface level industry partners, the surface level organisational partners. And I think that if our Manna Institute researchers can start thinking about making relationships now, so that what you put in a few months is really foundational and great research to fund, that'll be another great contribution to this research partnership.
And Jaelea, that brings another good point. You know, often when forming a relationship, it's not all about me. It's actually what can I give that organisation to build up that relationship, and from that comes. So it doesn't need a grant. You can just hook in and be on a board, or help out with something, or give a webinar or something like that, just to show you want to be engaged on a pro bono basis, and it really does build that relationship. So when something like this comes up. But that's a great heads up for the Manna researchers and the ECRs and postdocs. I'm pretty sure we'll be getting somewhere in this, watching this recording, we'll be getting a team together, and really we'll latch onto that. Now, I'm conscious of the time. Are there any final reflections? If not, because of the time, I just want to thank all the participants, and particularly the speakers, Anna, Niall and Jaelea. I just think it's absolute gold. It's just so valuable, and it's the stuff that we don't talk about, but the stuff which I think is the backbone of good research and impactful work to improve the mental health of our communities, and particularly rural communities. So on behalf of the Manna Institute, I just want to express my deep thanks and admiration for your contribution today. Thanks all. You can stop recording now, Ruthie. Thanks.
I will, yeah.
That was brilliant.